Hello, and welcome to 10 Ways to Read Picture Books. My name is Sarah Scoggin, and I'm the Early Childhood Librarian at the Newburgh Free Library in Newburgh, New York. And I made this video because you might be at home with a stack of picture books that you've read a million times, and they're starting to seem maybe a bit old. So these tips and tricks are to make those books seem fresh and new and more interesting again. So let's get started with tip number one, and that is to read the book in a different manner or as a different narrator. My example here is Chicka Chicka Boom Boom by Bill Martin Jr. and John Archambault. And I could try reading this like a pirate or a dinosaur or a princess, or just really high, really low, really fast, really slow, just to make it more interesting. So I'm going to read the first page here like a cat. Meow, meow. A told B and B told C, I'll meet you at the top of the coconut tree. Meow. And it's extra fun if you happen to have a puppet at home. So the puppet could read the story instead of just having you read the story. If you don't have a puppet like one of these, you could make one out of a paper bag. Have the children listening to the story make different paper bag puppets before you start. Or you could just even make a sock puppet. We even just use a sock without anything if you just want to grab one and then use that to narrate the story. So tip number one, try a new narrator. Okay, the second tip is to mix up your vocabulary. Add new words. So this is Clifford the Big Red Dog by Norman Bridwell. And of course, he's the big dog, so they describe him as a big dog. But you could try describing him as an enormous dog. So maybe one time through you read it and you say, he was a big dog, and then say, actually, he was enormous. That means really big. If it's said enormous or in any book that has a big word like enormous, you don't have to skip it or change it to big. You can just explain that means really big. In this case, we're adding our own bigger vocabulary words. So maybe next time through, he's colossal. Then maybe even gargantuan. You can think of as many synonyms as you want. One new one for each time you read the book. Or you could pick different pages. It doesn't have to be the same synonyms. You could just one time Clifford is enormous, and the next time this policeman here, instead of saying that he's unhappy, you could say he was displeased or worried or even chagrined at what's going on. So you can pick something else. But tip number two is to add new words. Tip number three is to look for details that you've never seen before. This is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie by Laura Joffe-Numeroff. And I have read this book. I've lost count of how many times I've read this book. But I actually reread it again this morning and noticed details that I had never noticed before. So I'm just going to show you two examples. At the beginning of this book, the boy here sees a mouse, and he had been reading a comic. And you can see there, he's got a comic book on the rock, and I never noticed that at the end of the book, the comic comes back. There it is hanging on the edge of the cabinet. And the same thing with, in this book, if you're not familiar, the mouse has a full day of activities inspired by his eating a cookie. And we have here a tiny little backpack that he takes off. And you can see that on the counter. And I never noticed that he left his backpack there on the counter. I saw it when he was coming in the house, and I never really thought about it. But at the end of the story, the backpack comes back again. So there it is, right where he left it on the counter. So tip number three is to try to find tiny little details that you never noticed before in a picture book. Tip number four is to expand a story with your imagination. So basically to use a picture book as a jumping off place for your own imagination, your own stories or ideas. So this is When Charlie Met Grandpa by Amy Hest and Helen Oxenberry. And on one page they have snowy street, and our main characters are down here. So the buildings are just background, but you could say, who do you think lives in this apartment here? Maybe a family like ours lives in that apartment. What about in here? What about this shop? If you ran this shop, what would you sell in your shop? It's kind of just a game to imagine what the author and the illustrator didn't tell us about in the background. Just make something up. Another version of the game might be something like from this book, Grandma Duck's Little Helpers, a Disney storybook. And in one page, she has some cupboards behind her. So you could say, what do you think are in those cupboards? They're in the kitchen, so they probably don't have snow boots or pillows in there. What do you think is in there? Probably not a television. Uh, Maybe a cookie sheet, maybe a strainer, maybe a colander. It could be a game. Can you think of things that would be in a kitchen cabinet? What do we keep in a kitchen cabinet? So, tip number 4 is to use books as a jumping place for your own stories. Number 5 is an alphabet adventure. So you can take a book. This is Elemental Peas by Keith Baker, and you can see that all the characters are these cute little peas with arms and legs. And it is an alphabet book, so it makes sense that, for example, for the page it's R, the P's are readers. R is for readers, my favorite page. But are there any R words somewhere else in the book? Can we find one? So let's see. I found on the B page, even though they're biking, B is for bikes, they're having a race. So race starts with R. So you could look at each letter and then try to find that letter represented somewhere else in the book that's not on that page. If you don't have an ABC book or you want to just try this on another book, you could just pick a letter, any letter, and maybe let's say H, and then pick a book. And this is Emergency Kittens, or as I should say, Emergency Kittens, to give it its flair there. And this is by Jody Jensen Schaefer and Dave Mottram. And I'm just going to open to a page, and we're looking for the letter H. So what can we find? Here we have on this page, this character Oscar is getting a haircut. That starts with H. This cat is pretending he's a hat. That would start with H. Or you could say this kitten is helping. Helping starts with an H. So you could just go through a book and pick any letter and see what you can find. So that's tip number 5 is try an alphabet adventure. Tip number 6 is to read a book backwards. Not literally backwards with the words, although that might be a fun challenge. But instead to start at the end and tell the story in reverse. This I would recommend to work with kids who are old enough that they know clearly what direction we usually read in. But if they already have that down, you could say, okay, let's practice telling the story backwards. So this is The Owl and the Pussycat by Edward Lear and Jan Brett. And at the end, the owl and the pussycat live happily ever after. They're dancing by the light of the moon on an island. You said, well, what happened before that? So if you've read from beginning to end, now we're going to read backwards. Well, before that, they had dinner, and it were slices of quince and mince in this case. Before that, they got married. Well, what happened before that? Well, before that, they needed a wedding ring, and you could just go back until you get to the beginning of the story. If a child is too young and they might be confused by trying to read in the opposite direction, you could just try having them tell you what happened at the end of the day. You might say, okay, here we are in bed. Before that, we took a bath. Before that, we ate dinner. Before that, what did we do? We played. Before that, and you can tell the whole day until you get to the beginning of the day. So that's my tip number 6 is to try telling a story backwards. Tip number 7 is to try to let your kids catch you changing the script. And by that I mean take a book that you know very well, like, for example, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle, And especially if the kids know this one so well, they've memorized it, say. So you read it once through verbatim, and then you go through and you change something. So when I get to this page, for example, on Friday he ate through 5 oranges. I could say on Friday he ate through 5 bananas, and they'll be like, no, those aren't bananas, those are oranges. Um, you could even try it um, the second time through, not even letting them see it, like just read it like this so they can't see, and then when you get to on Friday he ate through 5 bananas, they might be able to remember that that's not what happened. It was 5 oranges. So it's kind of like a memory game. And kids like to say, no, that's not right. You're changing the story. So try a silly script and see when they catch you changing it. Okay, number 8 is try sound effects, sort of tapping into radio plays of the past when you had to hear a story and you didn't necessarily see it. This is Black Beauty, a Little Classics version. So you could read through it and look at the pictures, but if you get to something like this, here we have the horse. Black Beauty is riding as fast as he possibly can to go get the doctor. So on this page, you could say he was riding really fast and have the kids take, these are 2 measuring cups, they could go and make the sound of the horse's hooves. And then they knock on the doctor's door and they can knock on something. You could even be very elaborate, make a rain stick and make it rain if it rains in the story, or you can just keep it simple, but it adds another layer to the story if you make up your own sound effects. Okay, tip number 9 is to take that one step further and actually reenact a story. So if you have a simple story like Where's Spot by Eric Hill, it's just the dog Sally here looking for Spot. So looks in all different places around the house and not under the bed. I say, under the bed, no. So you could take something to stand for a Spot. Here is my little dog, Jelly Bean the dog. So I could hide him under a basket, and as in the story, and I could go through with the child and say, okay, let's look. So first we look in the closet, and then we look under the bed. Is he there? No. Is he in this place? No. I could go through all the places in the book, and then we find Spot. So any story that's very simple where you could reenact it either with a stuffed animal, or you could make little paper dolls or something just to bring it into the real world. And finally, my 10th tip is to make connections. So there are 3 kinds of connections that literacy experts talk about. One of them is a text-to-text connection. So that's if I have one book and I say, for example, this is Let's Go Shopping, the little golden book, where a girl just goes through her day and her mom and dad take her to the grocery store and the farm store and the toy store. I could take that book and say, this character here is wearing a blue jacket. The book that we just read last night, the main character was wearing a blue jacket. So you're connecting one book, one text to another one. Text to self would be something like, we went to a garden store yesterday, or something that happened in the child's life. And the text to world would be something that you've seen out in the world, like that there's a tree just like that in the park, or that we saw even on television. It's something, we're connecting this book to something out in the world or something in a child's life. It's certainly a lot easier to connect to real life in a story that's very realistic, like Let's Go Shopping. But even if you have a story that's very fanciful, like these magical cats and 5 little kitty cats, there will be things in there that you could connect to. So you could connect to, we see some umbrellas. We have umbrellas in our house. We see a picnic basket. Maybe you could talk about a time you went on a picnic. So to try to connect books with other books, connect books with things you've seen in the world, and connect books to things in a child's life. They make the book seem more real and interesting. So those are my 10 tips. And I hope you enjoyed them, and stay tuned for 10 more ways to read picture books. Thank you for watching.